We were more hygienic than you.
When you picture the Middle Ages, what comes to mind? Probably muddy streets, peasants covered in grime, and nobles with yellow teeth who never bathed. It's an image reinforced by movies, TV shows, and even history books. Medieval people were dirty, smelly, and clueless about hygiene. But what if I told you that's a myth? In fact, hygiene in medieval Europe was far more advanced than we think. People bathed, washed their clothes, brushed their teeth with herbs, and even had public health laws to keep cities cleaner. While their standards weren't the same as ours, they were clever, resourceful, and surprisingly effective for their time. So today, we're peeling back the layers of history to reveal 10 surprising truths about medieval hygiene. By the end of this video, you might start questioning whether we're really as advanced as we like to think. Let's start with the biggest myth, that medieval people never bathed. The truth? Bathing was common, sometimes even luxurious. Many towns had public bathhouses where men and women would wash in heated tubs, often scented with herbs. For peasants, rivers and wooden barrels filled with heated water did the job. Monks bathed weekly, and nobles even more often. In fact, records from medieval France show that lords were advised to bathe before important meetings to smell fresh. Bathing wasn't just about cleanliness, it was social and cultural. Bathhouses doubled as meeting spots, relaxation hubs, and even makeshift spas. So no, medieval people weren't wallowing in filth. They just bathed differently from us. Bathing only works if you've got something to scrub with. And medieval people had exactly that: soap. Soap making was an industry. Craftsmen boiled animal fats with lye from wood ash, creating cleansing bars. Herbs like rosemary, thyme, and lavender were added for fragrance. Wealthier households imported olive oil-based soaps from the Mediterranean, prized for their smooth texture and fresh scent. Soap wasn't just for vanity. It was also believed to protect health by washing away bad humors. And here's the kicker. While soap use declined in some parts of Europe during the early modern era, medieval people actually washed more often than their descendants in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, what about teeth? Surely they ignored those, right? Wrong. Medieval people practiced oral hygiene daily. Tooth powders made from salt, crushed herbs, or even charcoal were rubbed onto teeth with cloth or twigs. Willow and hazel sticks were chewed to freshen breath and scrape plaque. For sweet-smelling breath, cloves, cinnamon, and mint leaves were chewed. Monks even had records of herbal recipes for mouthwater to rinse with. And here's a shocker. Archaeologists often find that medieval skeletons had fewer cavities than modern people. Why? Less sugar. Their dental care combined with diet actually protected their teeth better than ours does today. Medieval people didn't wash clothes daily, but they were smart about keeping clean. The key was linen undergarments. Shirts and shifts absorbed sweat and body oils, keeping outer clothing fresher. These undergarments were washed frequently with ash, lye, or river water. Sunlight acted as a natural disinfectant. Wealthier families had laundresses who scrubbed clothes against boards and used scented herbs in rinse water. Even peasants knew to air out bedding and clothing to avoid foul smells. So while laundry day looked different, cleanliness was part of daily life, especially for those who could afford extra garments. Clean water was a priority, especially in growing towns. Cities like Paris and London built aqueduct-inspired conduits that carried fresh spring water into town squares. Public fountains were common, where people collected drinking water. Wealthy monasteries engineered channels that brought water directly into cloisters for cooking, washing, and even flushing latrines. These weren't primitive mud puddles. They were designed systems. Yes, contamination sometimes happened, but the idea that nobody cared about clean water is false. In fact, access to fresh water was seen as a sign of civic pride and moral responsibility. Okay, let's talk toilets. Medieval castles had guardrobes, stone rooms where waste dropped through chutes, sometimes into rivers or moats. Monasteries often had multi-seat latrines with running water underneath, flushing waste away. Towns had privy pits lined with stone or timber to prevent collapse. And regulations required butchers and tanners to keep waste away from water sources. Sure, it wasn't perfect, streets could still be messy, but compared to later centuries, like 18th century London where chamber pots were dumped out of windows, the Middle Ages were ahead of the curve. Cleanliness wasn't just about water, it was about scent. Perfumes distilled from roses, violets, and herbs were popular among the wealthy. Lavender, sage, and rosemary were tucked into clothing to keep them fresh. Homes were often strewn with rushes mixed with mint or thyme to release fragrance when walked on. In churches, incense wasn't just ritual, it was believed to purify the air. Since people thought disease spread through bad smells, pleasant aromas were linked directly to health. Monks were among the cleanest people of their age, not because of luxury, but because of discipline. They washed their hands before prayer and meals, bathed weekly, and maintained cloister fountains for ritual and practical cleaning. Monastic rules even specified washing before copying manuscripts to avoid smudging sacred texts. For monks, hygiene wasn't separate from spirituality, it was part of it. Cleanliness symbolized purity of soul as well as body. Contrary to the dirty medieval myth, towns actually had public health laws. Residents were fined for dumping waste in streets. Guilds of butchers and tanners were tightly regulated to control smells and disease risks. During plague years, officials ordered street cleaning and even bonfires to purify the air. These measures show that medieval society was aware of hygiene's link to health, even if they explained it in terms of humors and bad air. The principle was there: dirty streets equals sick people. So, what does all this mean for us? Medieval hygiene was advanced for its time, but also sustainable. They used plant-based soaps, natural fabrics, herbal medicines, and communal water systems. Nothing was wasted. We can learn from their balance: less obsession with chemical sterilization, more emphasis on natural cleansing, and community responsibility. Modern technology is powerful, but medieval resourcefulness reminds us that clean living doesn't have to mean high energy or plastic waste. So, the next time you hear someone laugh about dirty medieval peasants, you'll know the truth. Hygiene back then wasn't primitive, it was adaptive, resourceful, and surprisingly advanced. Now I want to hear from you. Which medieval hygiene trick surprised you most? Would you try herbal toothpaste? Or maybe living with lavender-strewn floors? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this journey into the forgotten side of history fascinated you, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives into medieval life, and don't forget to ring the bell. Because sometimes, history isn't just about the past, it's about rediscovering wisdom we've almost forgotten.